guides like this. Now, we did not produce this. Our friends at Faith and Freedom Coalition produced this and printed this, and they printed this one in particular for the runoff. But if you're registered, you can vote in this runoff whether or not you voted in the November election a couple of weeks ago. As long as you're already registered, you can vote in the runoff. So there's a side-by-side comparison of the candidates, and that's available on our table as well. So this morning, I want to use this time I have remaining to talk to you about what's happening at the Georgia General Assembly that have been issues that we have tracked. And we have tracked more than this, but let me be, since it's not on here because this is from the most recent legislative session, let me talk about the heartbeat bill, which passed in 2019. Okay? In 2019, the heartbeat bill was introduced. We did not, write it or work on the details of it. What we worked on is getting people informed about it, encouraging them to contact their legislators, including pastors, right? And I would get on the phone and say, hey, pastor, your senator, and again, I'm not talking about in the U.S. Congress in Washington. I'm talking about the Gold Dome right down the road here in Atlanta. Your senator is on the fence about this. Would you be willing to call him, email him, text him? Would you be willing to share that information with your congregation and have them encourage him to call or contact? So that's the kind of stuff that we did on that. And the heartbeat bill simply does this. It changed Georgia law to recognize, by definition, a person is someone with a heartbeat. That's probably the simplest way to put it. Now, a heartbeat starts in the mother's womb somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. That's when a heartbeat is detected. So at that point in Georgia law now, that's recognized as a person. So when it comes to abortion, that means, okay, you cannot kill a person. There's some exceptions that just had to be put in there in order for it to pass. But basically, you can't kill a person. And if there's a heartbeat, that's a person. It also says that that's a person, so you can claim that person as a dependent on your Georgia tax return. It also says that's a person, so you can, an expectant mother who's got a, absent father or a deadbeat father can appeal for child support when a heartbeat is detected. Doesn't have to wait for the baby to be born, which is what it was under the old law. So she can get financial help for, the labor and delivery and all that, right? So it changes Georgia laws as to who is a person. Now, we knew that as soon as this passed, it would be appealed, and we knew what judge it would go to, and we knew that judge would put a stay on it. We knew that was going to happen. But we also knew that there was going to be a challenge to Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court. In fact, the next year at our summer conference, we actually had a workshop in 2020 as to what America's going to look like after Roe v. Wade is overturned. So we anticipated that 2 years ago. And sure enough, the Dobbs decision earlier this year that came out in June threw out Roe v. Wade after 50 years. And so our heartbeat bill could go into effect. And it did. But then, of course, more challenges from pro-abortionists. And just as recently as this week, a judge stopped or enjoined, I think is the legal term, only the part of the bill that deals with abortion and reporting abortion, things like that. So the part of the bill that still says you can claim a child as a dependent when there's a heartbeat, that's still in effect. The part of the bill that says you can appeal for child support, that's still in effect. It's the part dealing with abortion that he said is unconstitutional. Immediately, the same day, the Attorney General of Georgia appealed to the Supreme Court of Georgia and also appealed that the judge's order would not go into effect until that Supreme Court ruling. I know it's a little bit confusing, right? But basically saying, let's leave it as the heartbeat bill law until this is ruled on by the Supreme Court. Now, that has not been decided at this point. So that's just the back and forth of the issue of abortion today in our courts. And and the activist judges and things. But one thing I want to say about that, I was here for a pastor's fellowship meeting in 2019. And I was just sitting out there with our summer interns that our ministry had. And Brother Dexter Landers got up to preach. I don't know if you know Brother Landers, but I was not expecting him to say this at all. But he said it right from this pulpit. He said, all of you need to sign up for Paul Smith's newsletter. And I was like, he said, I get Paul's emails, and he's telling all the preachers, you need to get it too. And then he talked about the heartbeat bill. And he talked about a newsletter, an email that I sent out to pastors when the heartbeat bill was in the Georgia Senate. And we had gotten word down at the Capitol from a supporter of the heartbeat bill that there are 3 senators on the fence. And he said, if any of your pastors, any of your churches live in one of those 3 districts, see if they'll contact that senator. So I sent out an email and named the 3 senators. I said, if they're in your district, if they're in your area, tell them how you feel about this bill and get your people. So Dexter Landers said in this preacher's meeting, he said, I got up on Wednesday night when we got Paul's email, and I told our people, one of those 3 senators is our senator. And he said, we had maybe 100 people there that Wednesday night. I don't know how many he said called, but he said, what I do know is a couple of days later, I got a call from that senator. Preacher, tell your people to quit calling me. I'm going to vote yes on the bill. Right? And I just thought that was awesome. Right? That one church, that one pastor influenced that one senator, and that bill came down to a vote or 2. I mean, that could have been the difference, is the actions that church took. We don't know. But hopefully we'll continue to get good news on the heartbeat bill, and that will go back into effect. All right, let's take a look at a couple things kind of quickly. I'm mindful of my time. The Forum Act, this is not something we normally get involved in, but it regarded free speech on college campuses. But a lot of times it has to do with people sharing the gospel or giving out tracts or having a pro-life table or something. And the colleges were saying, okay, you only have free speech in this square block right here, and you have to get permission to use it and permission to be there, and that's the only place you can express free speech. Well, HB 1 threw that out and said you can't designate an area where that's where the students can have free speech, at least in Georgia, and Governor Kemp signed that. The mental health bill was a huge bill, big deal. In fact, you may have heard, how many of you heard that just this past week, the Georgia Speaker of the House passed away? Did y'all hear that? One person. All right, one in the back. Just shows how much we're keeping up with what's happening at the Georgia General Assembly. This was the only bill that I know of in the 12 years he was Speaker of the House that he actually sponsored. It's very unusual for the Speaker of the House to sponsor a bill, but that's how important this bill was to them. So we weren't even hardly paying attention to it until we realized, oh, wait a minute, this could force insurance companies to cover sex reassignment surgery. Call it a mental health issue. Now it has to be covered by insurance. This also could have resulted in prescribing treatment for pedophilia instead of prosecution. Oh, that's a mental health issue, so you need to treat that. And there was no exceptions for religious organizations. So that passed the House, easily. Now it's in the state Senate. And I went up to one of the senators who I have a good relationship with. He's chairman of the committee that this bill was going to go through. And I told him about our concerns, and I outlined these 3 concerns. And this is the advantage of being down there all the time, being down there and developing relationships. I had such a good relationship with him. He said, thank you, Paul. We will fix that. And they did. And they fixed those 3 issues. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't the only one bringing up these concerns, right? But I was talking to the chairman of the committee who is carrying this bill in the Senate. And again, there's, the way that I do this is not sticking my finger in their face and saying, bless God, you need to, I'm developing a relationship with them. Because what's more important than what I just described? What's more important than that is that I can be a witness to these guys. So we got that changed, and the governor signed that bill into law. And now all of a sudden, there we go, it stopped working. Betsy's Law, or the Maternity Supportive Housing Act, creates opportunities for nonprofits, including churches, to provide housing for expectant moms. And so this is kind of the idea of, well, if Roe v. Wade, this is before Roe v. Wade was overturned, but we were anticipating it, right? How can pro-life people help women who decide to keep their babies, right? And this is a way that they can cut through some of the red tape and at least provide housing for these women who are trying to, they're working, they, have certain things, but they're struggling with housing while they're expecting. They can, the nonprofit can provide housing for them. All right, I'm going to skip this one just for time's sake. It didn't pass. It didn't go anywhere. Save Girls Sports, you probably heard about, the effort and the problem of young men just claiming that they're girls and then competing against girls and, beating them in state championships, beating them out of scholarships. This bill would say that you cannot do that you have to compete based on your, what your birth certificate says. Unfortunately, they gutted it, and I thought, oh, great. They just punted it over to the Georgia High School Association. However, the good news is the Georgia High School Association voted unanimously to require what this bill would have required. Now, it's not written in the Georgia Code of Laws, but it is the policy now of the sports association that governs public school sports. So that was a good ending overall. Women's Health and Safety Act. So something that the Obama administration did not allow, the Trump administration did not allow, is abortion-inducing drugs being mailed to women. But the Biden administration, using COVID as an excuse, said women don't even have to get seen in person by a doctor. The doctor can do a televisit, and the woman has to say, I'm this far along, this is my blood type. They have to rely on the woman to tell the doctor exactly what's specific without the doctor ever examining her. And then the doctor can send these powerful abortion-inducing drugs through the mail for the woman to take on her own. And so this bill would require that you be seen by a doctor. Make sure that they know how far along you are. Make sure it's not an ectopic pregnancy. Make sure you got the right blood type. Just basic health. This is the lies of the pro-abortionists, that it's about health care. It's not about health care. If it was about health care, they would not be doing this. If it was in the best interest of the woman, they would not be doing this. But the entire industry is predicated on lies. The lies that it's a clump of cells and not a baby, right? How many have ever seen a gender reveal to reveal the clump of cells, right? How many have ever had a clump of cells shower, right? We're gonna have a fetus shower. No one has that. It's a baby. Everyone knows it's a baby, right? With its own DNA, and it's a separate body, right? But it's just lie after lie after lie. The other big lie is that Planned Parenthood, that only 3% of what they do is abortion. Have you heard that? Yeah, then why do Planned Parenthoods have to shut down in states that restrict abortion, right? They wouldn't need to shut down if it's only 3% of what they do. It's a lie, right? It's lie after lie after lie. And we're even seeing that in these campaign ads and things, the lies. So anyway, it's not about women's health. This bill did not pass. It passed the Senate, but not the House, and that'll have to get reintroduced. So the betting on horse racing and other forms of gambling, I won't get into all the details about that, except to say it does require a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate. So that's more than what's normally necessary. That's one of the things that's made it harder for them to get this done, is because it requires such a high bar. And then, if it does, then it'll go on a ballot for you to vote on. But let me tell you some of the misleading things about this. And if you get nothing else, get this, at least about the gambling part. The bill that would bring gambling on horse racing, that would bring tracks and other gambling on horse racing here, the name of the bill is the Rural Georgia Jobs Act. Now look, I normally speak to Christian groups like this, but occasionally I'll speak to a secular group, and I'll bring this up. And I'm like, look, you may not agree with me about gambling. You may want to see horse racing or casinos. But would you agree with me that they should at least be honest about what it is? The Rural Georgia Jobs Act, right? The casino bill. You'll get to vote. If it passes the House and Senate, you'll get to vote on it. But it won't say casinos. You know what the bill says? Destination resorts. Doesn't that sound lovely? A place you'd want to take your family, right? Not a place where senior citizens gamble away their Social Security check. But that's exactly what it is, right? So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and deception on this. I will tell you this. They did take a vote in the Senate on horse racing. And they came up 5 votes short, right? And the sponsor of that bill, the very powerful senator who sponsored that bill, stood up and said, "I'd like to have another vote." Now, he can't just request another vote. The rest of the senators have to agree to it. It doesn't have to be 2/3. It just has to be a simple majority. But this is a guy who every senator in there has to have his support to get their bills passed. They'll get nothing done. That's how powerful this guy is. And so when they voted for a revote, they all said, "Yeah, okay, we'll allow a revote." And they had enough votes to take, but he didn't want to take one right away, right? Because what did he need to do? He needed to twist some arms. He needed 5 votes to flip over and vote yes. And he worked on that all afternoon, well into the evening. We were down there waiting for this vote to come up again, and it never came up again. Now, what we were doing in the meantime is I was on the phone to pastors. "Hey, pastor, your pastor is one of the 5 that he's trying to flip. Would you call that senator? Would you email that senator? Would you text that senator?" "Yeah, and I'll get my people to do that, or I'll get other pastors to do that." The next day, one of those 5 senators told a friend of mine who's he's like the Southern Baptist guy like me. He represents the Southern Baptist churches. He said that one of the senators told him that he heard from 11 pastors the night before. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but these guys don't usually hear from 11 people, 11 of their constituents. That's how few people know what's going on, how few people contact their state house member, state senator. They don't usually hear from 11 people. 11 pastors who all represent a group of people in their district? Man, that rattled him to the bones. And there was no way that he wanted to vote on that at that point. So that failed, but we anticipate that it'll continue to come up again. So what can you do? Well, you can pray and you can vote. Now, there's only one election left this year, and that's the runoff. But as you anticipate the upcoming elections, it's not just president, it's not just governor. These state house races and state senate races are incredibly important. And I would encourage you to make sure that you do not miss an opportunity to vote. So pick up our voter guide, pick up our prayer letter, and we have some handouts here that are free to take on some of the legislation I talked about, the heartbeat bill and gambling, okay? Make yourself, make those, what am I trying to say? Take advantage of those. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, pick them up. The other stuff, the books and mugs and things, we just do it on a donation basis. I can give you a recommended donation if you'd like, but we appreciate your support. We certainly not only appreciate your church's prayers, but we certainly appreciate any consideration of partnering with us for financial support or you as an individual. Okay, I got a couple of minutes to take questions. I'd like to keep it on what I've talked about, which is our ministry or the legislation that we've worked on. I try to keep people from just getting up and pontificating about things that bug them in politics. We all know that politics drives us all crazy, and I think it's because of the word itself, politics. It comes from 2 words, poly, which means many, and ticks, which are blood-sucking parasites. So I think that's what probably... No, but we even use politics to talk about things that aren't politics, right? Well, I didn't get that job promotion because of, politics. Or my son isn't the starting shortstop on the baseball team because of, politics. We use politics always in a negative connotation. But I know there's a lot of things you could complain about. But any questions about what we talked about this morning? Yes, sir.
I just thinking about we're coming down towards the end of the year. Is there any votes that are
Georgia General Assembly. They won't go back until January. Excuse me. But in D.C., they, when I was up there in September, I was lobbying against what's called the Respect for Marriage Act. It's a completely misnamed bill. What this does is it codifies, it puts into the code of laws same-sex marriage and interracial marriage. Now, why is interracial marriage in there? Well, it's the way to characterize people who oppose this as being what? Yeah, right. So, you not only hate gays, but you're a racist, right? There's not a group in the country, there's not an organization in the country trying to undo interracial marriage, advocating against interracial marriage. No one is doing that, right? But they add that in there, just, again, politics, right? So what this bill would do is not only say that states must recognize same-sex marriage, which they already do, so in that sense, it doesn't change a thing. But it also says your religious beliefs have no effect on that. You cannot use your religious beliefs as an excuse to not recognize that. So this would apply to what? Somebody tell me something that you've heard in the news that you can imagine this applying to. Okay, so no. I'm gonna say no, because that is not happening. Now look, don't misunderstand. I feel like, you know what, I could raise a lot of money if I got up and said, they're going to make pastors marry, but no one's doing that, okay? So to be fair, this bill would not require that. And in fact, there's a little bit of protection for that, right? So I don't think you've heard of that happening in the news, pastors being forced to do that, right? So what have you heard in the news? Yes, they're gonna vote on it next week. Yeah, they're gonna vote on it. But what have you heard of? The florist, the baker, the photographer, secular wedding venues, right? No more exemptions. A county clerk issuing, marriage certificates. No more exceptions, right? And everyone believes that they're coming for Christian schools, Christian universities. Again, I don't think churches. And you know what I mean when I say that. I could stand up here and, really raise a lot of money. So they're coming after churches. But to be fair, just like I don't know of any group going after interracial marriage, I don't know of any group trying to force pastors to marry people against their beliefs. But it doesn't have to go that far. Christian schools who have their policies that say you can't be in a same-sex relationship and be a student, you can't be in a same-sex relationship and teach here, they're going to go after all those. And you remember they hired 87,000 new IRS agents? What are they going to be doing? And I sat in our two senators' office, Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock. I sat in their offices in September with their staff. And I said to both of them, if your boss was standing right here, this is what I would ask him. Are you okay with Christian ministries losing their tax-exempt status over the issue of marriage? I said, think about, and I said to these young people who work in this office, think about what Christian ministries do now, right? And I rattled off, the helping the poor, and adoption agencies, and all the ministries, healthcare, all the things. And even one of them even added one or two. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Now imagine losing all of that over the issue of marriage. And who's going to be taking that all up? Well, the government's going to have to pick up all that. That's part of the reason why churches get a tax or tax exempt, is because if they aren't doing it, the government's going to have to do it. So This is in the 25 years that I've been doing any kind of advocacy work. As I said, I've been doing this full time since 10, but I've been going to Washington for 25, 26 years and doing this. I'm not sure there's been a piece of legislation that has troubled me more in terms of going after religious freedom. And what you might hear is that there was an amendment added that protects religious freedom, but it really doesn't. It's just window dressing. It really doesn't protect religious freedom, at least according to my contacts in Washington. Great question. I got time for one more, I think. Hey, you know what? Most people don't even know to ask that question. That's a pretty good question. So what they'll do is they'll pre-file, usually starting here in December. And I'm not aware of anything that's been pre-filed. But they'll look, this is what I try to tell people. Everyone focuses on Washington, D.C., right? I'm not sure I know why. The news we listen to or whatever. But Washington, D.C., they're not passing a whole lot of bills. They're naming bridges and post office. Now, when they do, it's something dramatic like this Respect for Marriage Act. But under the Gold Dome in Atlanta, they will pass hundreds and hundreds of bills this year. So they'll introduce a bunch between now and the first of the year. They'll introduce a bunch all through the year. And the governor will sign hundreds of... Most of the laws we live under, that's where they come from, not from Washington. So it behooves you to keep up with that and know what they're working on. And our email keeps you up with that. We have a website with a blog. We keep legislative updates. But I anticipate horse racing, casinos, sports betting. The sports betting on the phone is the hardest for us to fight. The casinos, we can argue, because it's a brick and mortar building, that it's going to cannibalize all the businesses. It's going to bring in human trafficking, drug trafficking. Even like a place like Fox Theater says it will put us out of business, right? Because they'll bring in all the same acts, but they'll pay them more than what we can pay them, right? So there's even some opposition there. But this betting on the phone, I mean, people are basically already doing it. And every sports thing you see on TV has advertising. FanDuel, DraftKings, that's what this is. And so I'm afraid that that's going to be the hardest to stop. All right. Thank you. Want me to close in prayer? You want to close in prayer? I'll do it. Father, thank you for the privilege and opportunity to be here this morning. Bless, we pray, in the service to follow. In Jesus' name, amen.